Now you have a unit selected, and you can see the unit type at the bottom of the screen. Let's issue a move order to the next smoke flare you see.
Real-time strategy has been a staple of the PC gaming scene for decades. It's a genre alongside simulators that seems tailored specifically for the hardware. All the buttons and hotkeys rapidly scrolling and jumping around a giant map, selecting anywhere from a single unit to dozens at once. So its presence was pretty firmly established as a PC thing right from the get-go. Not that it stopped consoles from trying, of course. All across different platforms and generations, you had stuff like StarCraft 64, Aliens vs. Predator Extinction, and Tom Clancy's End War. Remember End War?
Voice control lets you call the plays.
So in 2009, Ensemble Studios, creators of the venerable Age of Empires and/or Mythology series, was tasked with turning Halo into an RTS, while keeping it on its native Xbox platform. This killed Ensemble. Did they at least die making a good game? Yeah, I'd say so. Halo Wars does legitimately manage to take the established genre and mold it into something streamlined without sacrificing too much in the way of what makes it unique. You have a base, you build units, you buy upgrades for them, those units counter other units, you fight for map control, and take down the opposing armies. It's all there. At first glance, the comparison to StarCraft is inevitable. I mean, humans, religious aliens, and an all-consuming swarm. The Covenant have always owed a lot to the Protoss, and the human buildings in this game even fly. And, you know, there's some other stuff. But it's not an accurate comparison in the end. Halo Wars is actually more like Dawn of War. A lot like Dawn of War, they've even got Baneblades. There's a focus on smaller clusters of units rather than massive armies. You might build 2 tanks, not 12. It rewards a small mix of units that complement each other rather than multiple waves of 1 or 2 kinds. Building 1 infantry unit gets you a handful, and as their HP drops, so does the number of dudes alive. A cover system exists, along with map objects you can garrison infantry inside of, like a tower or a neutral resource-producing structure. Sometimes there are interactable map objects that do other things. Units can die quickly in larger engagements, but in general, things have a lot of health. Feel free to let your guys fend for themselves for a little bit while you go buy upgrades or something. If you like Dawn of War, specifically the first one, this is a decent comparison. Or, if you like Halo Wars, give Dawn of War a try. It's usually pretty cheap. But aside from that, let's take a look at the mechanics overall. Much like other RTS games, you have 3 resources: population, energy, and cubes. You start with 30 population, and you won't get more without a late-game upgrade. Cubes come from the cube building. Build the building, and it builds cubes. Cubes are your real money, and everything wants your cubes, so make sure you always have lots of cubes. Energy is the game's tech tree, or I guess I should say tech staircase. It isn't really a resource you spend, it's more of a status symbol. Better units and buildings require you to be generating a certain amount of energy. If you're there, you can build it. You start at 0 and you cap out at 4. Easy enough. There's no per unit building requirements other than where they're built from. Men come from the man building, cars come from the car building, and planes come from the plane building. Your main building can produce a couple things too, though it might change depending on what mission you're playing. You can always get warthogs from it though. Almost every unit has a special ability that works off a cooldown. It might come with it, or you might have to buy it. The abilities are usually there to help the unit deal with something that's otherwise outside of its area of expertise, and they're useful even if you pair them with something that covers the same weakness. Your basic infantry cluster can throw grenades to help deal with larger groups of enemy infantry, or help it deal with a vehicle that might be giving it some trouble. Sure, a tank would be better overall, but tanks are expensive, even if they can get infantry-killing incendiary shells. The anti-vehicle Cobra can turn into a building-killing stationary turret, and the Warthog can experience road rage and slam itself into something at 60 miles an hour. Which is good, because unless you buy the gunner upgrade, it doesn't have a way to defend itself. Upgrades for everything are bought at the building the unit comes from. Sometimes the upgrade unlocks those special abilities, and sometimes it adds a permanent buff to the unit, like the Warthog gunner. Infantry can be upgraded to add a +1, the fast but lightly armed Hornet can get a pair of friends to fire rockets out of the sides, and that Cobra from before can get extra armor when it's in siege mode. But watch out, because sometimes the upgrades have upgrades. Just like the text stairs, it's a linear progression. You'll get these upgrades in this order, or not at all. Not impressed by the Warthog, even with a gunner in the back? How about someone riding a shotgun? Or riding grenade launcher, I guess. Still not good enough? Okay, switch out the minigun with a Gauss rifle. How's that for a fast scout unit? Have your extra dude in all your infantry squads, but want a little more? Take away their grenades, give them rocket launchers instead. Predictably, they've gotten themselves hurt. How about a medic? Now they've survived a while, so why not make them all shock troopers? So where does this all come from? Well, your base, obviously. Base building in Halo Wars is a streamlined process, just like the rest of it. You have a central command building and then a rounded number of pads. Buildings go on the pads and only on the pads. There's no playing SimCity or anything like that. Upgrading the command building gets you more pads. At the first level, you get 3, then 5, and then 7. After the first upgrade, you also get 4 spots to build turrets. The turrets are pretty decent on their own, but you can give each one a different secondary weapon to make them better at dealing with infantry, vehicles, or air units. Turrets do also have their own upgrades in one of the buildings. The system works well enough overall, despite anyone's feelings about the preset building locations. It makes you make some choices as to what you want to have access to. With 7 slots to work with at the max level of your command structure, you can have every building and enough generators to get you to 4 energy, but you won't be making many cubes. If you want to double up on your cube production while still having 4 energy, you'll have to skip out on a production building. If you want more buildings of one type, go take another base. So you've got your production buildings, your resource generators, and your base upgrade building. What's next? Well, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes there are structures around the map you can tell a unit to hang out in. Some of these give you an extra energy, and some generate cubes. Spending 100 cubes in a single population to secure your second or even third energy is a lot cheaper than upgrading a generator or buying a new one, even if you do have to make sure those guys in it stay alive. They get a defense bonus, I'm sure they'll be fine. All of it comes together to make something that, while more simplistic than seasoned RTS players might be looking for, is still a solid bit of design. Obviously, these concessions were made to play nicely with the limited control scheme available on an Xbox 360 controller, but they managed to squeeze a lot of the fundamentals into it regardless. That's not to say it's all there, though. The actual gameplay is where the limitations are most obvious. You can either select
All units.
Or
Local units.
and then scroll through the by type sub-selection from there. The PC version did at least add the ability to assign more traditional control groups, and you can still double-click on a unit to select all of that type, shift-click to add a unit to an existing selection, or just box select from your screen. As for controlling them, you can tell them to move, and that's it. There's no difference between move and attack move. Every unit can fire while moving, so just point them in a direction and they'll do their thing on the way. There are no formations, you can't set up patrol patterns, queue up different commands, or tell them to hold position and not chase enemies that come into range.
No. Stay with your squad. No, guy. No.
And the pathfinding can be less than great.
Almost there. No, if you want to try again, that's fine. No, it's behind you. Okay, you almost got it. Just no, the other way. No, going back. Wait, what? No, behind. Okay, there we go.
One nice thing, at least, is that a collection of different units will always only move as fast as the slowest unit in the mix. Warthogs are way faster than infantry, but if you have them together in the same group, they'll both trundle along right next to each other with no problem. It's a decent solution to keep mixed units in one piece without relying on excessive micro. And honestly, laid out like this, Halo Wars makes a strong argument for being someone's first exposure to real-time strategy. It's simple and streamlined enough to understand within the first couple missions. Enough remains of the micro and macro the genre is known for to let a new player know it exists without overwhelming them, and it wraps it all up in a campaign that can still be challenging, even with all the quality of life and ease of use changes. Sure, you could just hand someone a more complex RTS and set the AI to easy, but this is still a nice, if lightweight, exploration of the traditional systems with just enough cut out of them to smooth certain things over. So, how is the campaign? Well, it's pretty good, if a bit short. You only get 15 missions, and of course the first handful are really just tutorials. It does a good job of giving you new toys to play with on a regular basis, though the units you have access to can change pretty drastically between missions sometimes. One unit's only available on a single mission, and it doesn't even get used for half of its intended purpose. They give you a building killer on the map without any enemy buildings. Odd choice, but someone's gotta repair the generator. Or that time you get the EMP truck in the mission where you fight only unshielded biological units. Objectives range from the classic kill the base to secure these points, all the way to crazier stuff like when you play hide and seek with a giant laser. Get seen enough times and it'll melt the offending unit, and then the rocks protecting your base. Some missions will have you spreading out quickly to save pockets of trapped friendlies, and others will let you hunker down for as long as you want and make big pushes on your own time. It's a decent mix, and even the simpler missions might have a little twist to them. The only real issue comes from the handful of no-build segments, where you just have some units and nothing else. This is where the lack of unit micro really hurts, because at worst, your units are running all over the place for want of a hold position button, getting themselves killed by charging headlong into groups of enemies, and at best it's just boring due to a lack of options. What I'd consider the biggest missed opportunity is the bonus objectives. They went to the trouble of putting them in the game, but they don't do anything. Kill stalks. Kill vampires, kill swarms. You might expect to get a special unit or just some bonus cubes from it, but no, nothing. This lady's looking for her kid so they can evacuate together. Look, I found him. You're reunited at last. Well, it does add to your end of mission score, in case you want to show off on the Halo Wars leaderboards. What's weird is that sometimes you do get bonus units, usually a powerful vehicle like a Grizzly or a group of ODSTs before you have the means to build them yourself, but they're always just part of the mission itself, not as a reward for doing something outside the direct objective. Beyond that, every mission gives you access to a radial menu of special offerings. Remember those shock troopers? Well, they're orbital drop shock troopers, and we have a ship in orbit. This ship, the Spirit of Fire, has a handful of support abilities you can call in at any time you want. You always have access to a big circle that heals units and buildings, but sometimes you get to use a cryobomb, a big railgun, or you can phone a friend and have them drop off a helpful airstrike. Occasionally you can also call in a transport that can move units from one area to any other on the map. These abilities also operate on a cooldown and most cost cubes to activate. The strange thing is that what you have access to changes per mission, without any real reason behind it. Being able to choose what you had access to before the mission started would have been nice, or if you could buy the abilities in mission, like adding the secondary attack to the turrets. But what's it all in service of? What's the story? I'm glad I'm pretending that you asked. I'm just gonna spoil the entire thing right here, so if you haven't played it and it sounds interesting, go check it out. So about 20 years before the first Halo game, the human planet of Harvest is under attack by the Covenant. They're being led by someone named the Arbiter, like that guy from Halo 2. He likes to let people know he's a badass by running around with 2 energy swords. He and the rest of the aliens are there because it turns out that Harvest is home to an ancient and mysterious Forerunner relic. Because of course it is. So anyway, the aliens are attacking, and the Spirit of Fire, commanded by Captain Cutter, is sent in to offer support. Sergeant Forge is under your control as the player, and Professor Anders tags along because, hey, weird alien thing. You fight them back, take over their dig site, and learn that the artifact was a map pointing to another Forerunner thing, this time on the settled world of Arcadia. It's actually pretty impressive just how often humanity has managed to settle a world that's right in the way of the Covenant finding something that they want. Maybe they should rename themselves the Convenient. By the time you get there, Arcadia is under attack, and it's time to evacuate some civilians. It's around now that 3 Spartans show up: Jerome, Douglas, and Alice. They tag along for most of the rest of the game, but don't bother trying to get to know them. They're only in 2 cutscenes. They pack a different heavy weapon each, one for each unit type, and since they're heroic units, they can't die. Spartans never die, they just lie down and take a nap until half their health is back. Send someone over to wake them up, and they'll stagger groggily back into the fray. For what it's worth, Forge is also a heroic unit. Interplanetary Power Nap Champion 25 whatever. The 3 Spartans do also have the cool ability to hijack enemy vehicles, so be sure to make use of that. With the civilians evacuated, you're free to investigate what the Covenant wanted this time. Unfortunately for you, they wised up and put a big force field around their latest science project, so you have to find a way to punch through. You do, but before you can figure out what exactly they were after, that Arbiter guy shows up and kidnaps the professor. You're on the move again, this time following the aliens to an unknown planet that turns out is absolutely covered in the Flood. Your forces were scattered during the landing, so it's time to gather your party before venturing forth. It's here that you might learn something very important. Against the Flood, infantry units are next to useless. Think your flamethrower dudes are the perfect answer? Nope, they just get turned into more enemies. See, the Flood have their little headcrab-alikes, the infection forms. These run towards your infantry and infect them, turning individual units within the squad into more enemies for you to deal with. Very flavorful, but just as annoying as the Flood are in the other games. See, their ability to do this isn't dependent on your unit's health or anything like that. This isn't a you lose one, they gain one sort of situation. No, they just grab one of your units and there's nothing you can do about it. Get used to having warthogs replace your infantry squads, they're only like 50 cubes more expensive anyway. Moving further in, it turns out you've just been walking on a shell, because the planet's hollow, and now it's trying to drag you inside. You've got a limited amount of time until the ship gets dragged under, so gather the rest of your forces before they're cut off forever. While all that's happening, Professor Anders learns that the Covenant are here to secure a massive fleet of ancient Forerunner ships that they plan to use against humanity to end the war. Anders manages to escape in time to warn the Spirit of Fire, and you're left to figure out how to deal with that with only a single ship. Well, it's simple. The planet's hollow, its sun is in the center, so obviously you just teleport the Spirit's warp drive into the sun. Yes, it is time to blow up the sun. After dragging the warp core up a couple hills, the Arbiter catches onto your plan and 1v1's Forge.
My face will be the last thing your pathetic eyes ever see.
It doesn't go well for him. With your only named opposition out of the way, you're free to ready the sun blow-up sequence. While you were rigging the sun to explode, the Covenant set up a force field over your only exit. For your final task, take control of all 6 nodes, turn it off, and ride off very much away from the sunset. That done, it's time for the long way home. Without a warp core, they're down to elbow grease alone. Our story ends on a bittersweet note as we bid goodbye to all the memorable characters we met along the way. Like Douglas.
Hey, which one of you is Douglas?
The story of Halo Wars is perfectly fine, and if you're a fan of the universe, I'm sure seeing more of it is always nice. It just doesn't really go anywhere that the series hasn't gone before. The Covenant attack a human world because there's a thing they want and we have to fight them. Yeah, groundbreaking. The real issue I have is that the story slowly but surely slips out of alignment with the gameplay. Somewhere around the halfway point, the things you do in the missions stop following what the cutscenes are showing you. That ancient Forerunner fleet? Mentioned, but you never do anything about it directly. There's no mission to try to stop the Covenant from getting to it, or destroy some of the ships before realizing that it's futile. Similarly, the Arbiter that's been such a thorn in your side across half a dozen cutscenes? Well, that's the only place he exists. Sure, he can be assumed to be the one commanding the alien armies you've been fighting, but you don't have any interaction with him as a player. And then he just dies. In a cutscene. At the beginning of the mission. The objective of the mission wasn't even to break through his army and kill him. No, he's just gone now. Okay, bye. The RTS genre isn't exactly known for its abundance of boss fights, but plenty of them have you kill off named hero characters at least. Conversely, there are things in the missions that aren't reflected in the story being told. Once you get to the Flood planet, you can find a proto-Gravemind, like that guy from Halo 2. It doesn't factor into what's happening, and then it blows up with the sun. I'm not really sure why it needed to be there. As a fun Easter egg? Maybe, but the Flood themselves aren't even really included in the story. It seems like they're in the game just to check a Halo-shaped box more than anything. This is a game pretty exclusively about the Covenant. Even when you land on the surface of the Flood world, more attention is paid to the fact that this is apparently the first time humanity has come across the Brutes than is paid to the fact that the Flood exist.
Designation Jiralhane, aka Brutes. Responsible for the attack on Harvest.
I don't know, it just feels like there's a weird disconnect that's gotten pretty big by the very end. And it is the end, because there's only the one campaign. No Covenant side of the story for you. I'm not saying this is a deal-breaker, but it is a little disappointing, given the expectations someone might have of the genre. Getting exploded by a sun is a pretty definitive endpoint, but what about what was going on during all the other missions, or even before them? For what it's worth, the Covenant are playable in multiplayer, but I haven't done any of that. Playing an RTS against another person is just... you know, I got enough stress in my life already. The game can also be played fully co-op, which you might have expected us to do given the name of the channel, but not everything can be on brand all the time. And speaking of on brand, Halo Wars very much is. Everything in the story feels distinctly Halo, even if that can sometimes be to its detriment. One thing I will say is that it pretty neatly sidesteps the dreaded prequel problem, at least as far as the story's concerned. Writing a prequel is always a rough choice. You can write something so grand and bombastic that'll get people asking why it wasn't brought up in any of the things said after it. You can write something so small and self-contained that people wonder what the point of it was, or you can write about an event people already know the outcome of and will ask why they should care about what's happening when they already know what will end up happening. Of course, there are exceptions everywhere, and I'd say that Halo Wars is one of them. The Spirit of Fire and her crew interacted with 2 planets where they could very easily have been lost in the chaos of the events taking place, pursued a fleeing enemy vessel without letting anyone know where they were going, and pretty definitively blew up the only evidence of what they found. So, kudos to the writers. Where they really fall into the prequel problem is all these new units. Cobras, Wolverines, Grizzlies, Vampires, Locusts, Flood Birds, Flood Bombers. The prequel problem asks, where did all of these go? It's not the most valid criticism. Gameplay has to come first, and RTS games tend to be known for their wide selection of units. If Halo Wars had constrained itself to just what had been available in Halo 1, it wouldn't have made for that interesting of a skirmish game. At the end of the day, Halo Wars is a solid little RTS that did exactly what it set out to do. It won't necessarily wow anyone who's a multi-decade veteran of the genre, but it's a good time. Like I said earlier, it's a solid contender for someone's introduction to RTS games, and it's an interesting enough look on its own at a different way of doing things for people who are already fans. I would like to say that this will be the end of Halo for now, but I did just pick up Halo Wars 2 on sale, so who knows. Keep an eye on this space for both some more solo videos and our next actual cooperative endeavor. Though it's not entirely cooperative, you'll see. It'll be a good time. Until then, have yourselves a good day.